Hey everybody, it's Susan Lindner. I'm your host of the Innovation Storytellers Show. Today is going to be unlike any of our other shows previously because we're talking about a word that doesn't get spoken inside of large companies, and that is stereotypes and how we operate around them, through them, with them. We shun them, and yet they wind up playing a major role in how we interact with one another in the workplace and outside of it. So I'm so excited, having met one of the co-founders of the Stereotype Project Foundation at the Fast Company Innovation Festival this year in New York City. I want to introduce you to these amazing co-founders, Gian Franco, who is the chairman of the Stereotype Project Foundation, who was born in Trinidad and Tobago and has spent the last 20 years in different roles in media and entertainment and technology, and is now running this incredible foundation, tabling some of his previous experience or taking some of his previous experience from Microsoft and to Amazon, and even working on a digital gaming distribution platform. So I'm excited, Gian Franco. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
As well as your lovely co-founder, who I got to meet wearing this amazing Homer Simpson t-shirt paired with this fantastic skirt that in a million years I couldn't have put together, but just was the bomb and the talk of the conference. Liz Kim, who brings her broad experience from fashion and music and advertising in the digital industry to the Stereotype Project Foundation. In her last position at D-Box, a high-end luxury residential real estate marketing agency, she oversaw finance and operations and HR and business strategies. And Liz is a second-generation Korean American who's lived here in New York, in El Paso, and LA, in Chicago, and New York. Her interests are as diverse as this project. And so I'm excited to speak with both of you today. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
So first up, let's make this clear for our audience. Why should innovators know about stereotyping and the work that specifically you're doing at the Stereotype Project Foundation? Why does it matter?
I think because it's everywhere. And it's so pervasive. And I think, just as you said, it's not really discussed in the workplace, but I think it's not really discussed generally. One of the things that I like to highlight is that, we are wired to shortcut, right? If you were to be forced to make a conscious decision about every opportunity or any scenario that came up over the course of the day, you probably wouldn't make it through the front door. We do many things on automatic. And so being aware of how stereotypes play into that sort of automatic behavior, I think is critically important for us to be able to, at certain points, take a step back and evaluate what may be the implications of those shortcuts before we just follow through on what we've always done.
And, we talk about in innovation, we talk about bias all the time, right? We have, if we're doing incremental innovation, little baby steps, right? Hot water tide, cold water tide, right? These are baby steps for us, but we present with a bias each time, right? Is that, as innovators, when we're thinking about bias, where does stereotyping play a role in that bias that we might just, like you said, automatically bring with us?
Well, yeah, I think it's deeply rooted in that bias, right? If you think about any individual's bias, it's a very personal journey. Your prejudices, which is explicitly to prejudge, right, from the Latin, are a function of your personal journey in the world. How you've seen other people interact with other people, lessons that you've been taught, how you've seen other people respond to particular situations, how you see people represented in the media. And so that forms a very, very unique point of view as to how the world works and your place in it, and how the defaults work in your mind as to how you would approach various situations. And so I think it really goes back to an understanding. Because if you don't have an awareness of your bias, if you don't have an awareness or an understanding of where that bias comes from, then you can't do anything about it oftentimes. And oftentimes when you see people having conversations, they feel personally attacked, that, you know, my bias is affecting you, or it is implying particular things about you in certain ways. But that's often because we haven't been able to do the internal reflection as to, where has this come from? Why do I think this way? And I wasn't even aware that I thought this way until you pointed it out. So bias in general, I think, is critically important, and stereotypes within bias is critically important to be able to understand and then hopefully move past or evolve past where we may be.
Yeah. So Liz, tell us a little bit about the Stereotype Project Foundation itself. Like, what is the project? What's the mission of the project?
Yeah, so we are trying to create the world's biggest database, indexing every category of every stereotype that exists for everybody around the globe. So we understand that it's not a small task. We understand that Gian and I are, you know, kind of a little bit over our head, which is the reason why we need to hire and find brilliant people who are way smarter than us to help us solve this issue and problem. And our assumption at this point is, one, that no one single person has an encyclopedic knowledge to offend other people because of their biases that they may or may not be aware of. And two, we're also assuming that most people don't intend or mean to hurt other people with their words and what they're actually saying. So if those two assumptions are true, then the database, we believe, will help not only educate, but allow advocacy groups to advocate for themselves, and hopefully be able to, for all of us to contribute in ways of creating a more balanced world for all of us.
Mm. And so the idea of mapping these, is it a desire to, when it comes down to it, is understanding our biases, but also bringing together people around the commonalities around our biases too? Like that we all possess these things. Like, no, there's not a lot of judgment here. It's we all possess them. To Jan's point earlier, is we all come to the table wanting a shortcut to try to understand one another as humans, right? Because it would be very hard to do that with billions of people on the planet. So
Yes.
is the intention to figure that out?
So we're hoping that the database because the database itself will be free to public, like Wikipedia. So any kind of educational purposes and any kinds of, you know, non-monetizing kinds of intentions or products and services could be free to public. However, we're also creating a for-profit company, which is a software. So you can even imagine like spell check for stereotype. And we've been told in the past 18 months, people are also getting fatigued, being called out of all the things that they're doing wrong or saying wrong or thinking wrong or writing wrong. And so the idea is for us to create a software that could be implemented and integrated into your operating system or in all of your kind of documents in social media, and in the privacy kind of your own personal space, you'll be able to educate yourself about things that you are saying incorrectly or writing that are, you know, misaligned with or proliferating any kind of negative stereotype or any kind of stereotype there is. So we're hoping that we're able to create that kind of space for people.
Yeah. So what, you both come from backgrounds in digital and media and advertising. What does this mean? Because so much of what we do is we make giant assumptions about big swaths of the population in order to sell them stuff. Where would we be without our stereotypes, our brand personas, right? All of those things. How would you see advertising functioning once we figure out all of these stereotypes?
You know, I think it's really interesting that you bring up advertising. I read a really fascinating article in Adweek about the stereotyping of the African American community. And it really highlighted the fact that while stereotypes or very specific cohorts are used in advertising for their efficacy, they are actually wildly ineffective when you start to understand that the dimension of race or ethnicity is one, but also very, very limited because people are so multifaceted, right? By looking at somebody, you will not know that they may be a father or be a musician or be a member of so many other groups that may unify a large swath of the population and be far more effective for your campaign than simply their race. And when you understand the nuances within any race or ethnicity or culture and how diverse that one race or ethnicity can be, then you start realizing, oh, wait a minute, we're missing a huge opportunity to really get our message across in a far more effective way. So I would actually argue that it would be way more effective, not necessarily to completely eradicate grouping people based on various interests, but not doing it in such a broad way that we lose the efficacy of the communication that we're trying to have.
Yeah. So tell us how it works. Tell us how you go about the day-to-day of running the Storytelling Project Foundation. How do you do it?
It's every day every day is something different, and every day is it's no easy feat for us to get done what we need to get done. But right now we're in the process of trying to build the prototype of the database. So we're not advocacy group and we're not actually doing the research, but we're just creating the infrastructure to actually aggregate the information and all the research that's out there in a data form so that it could be accessible by public. So that's kind of our initial, like one of the priorities that we have on the table at the moment. But other kind of highest priority is fundraising. So we need funds to be able to do what we need to do and hire the talents, people, as we mentioned, who are hopefully much smarter than we are to be able to solve this problem with us. And in order for us to create those kinds of infrastructures, we need the funding to do it. So we are hustling out there as much as we can, reaching out to as many people as we can, trying to connect as many dots as we can, and trying to raise the money to do the work that we need to do.
Yeah. And then tell us a little bit about the data sets and where you're pulling all this information from to begin to collect these stereotypes.
Gian?
Yeah, so this data, the fascinating thing is a lot of this data already exists, right? If you do a search on Google Scholar for the word stereotype, you're going to get over 1 million hits, right? And so that's across literature and academic papers. And I will tell you, if you tell a PhD student that you've read their paper, they will have a conversation with you quite enthusiastically. So there are a lot of people already doing incredible work in a number of different verticals. And we just want to bring all of that information together in a very, very accessible way. We are building this database to almost be like a Wikipedia, but on steroids. So rather than just have a database of entries, we really want to take you and contextually carry you through all of the information around the stereotype. So who started the stereotype? When did they start it? Why did they start it? What has been the implications of them starting it? And how was it introduced into sort of the public discourse? And then further, how was that perpetuated using mass media in general over the course of history, and what has the implications of that perpetuation been, so that you can go from not knowing even that this was a stereotype to being fully educated on often the very insidious and various reasons why the stereotype was invented and implemented. And all of this information, as I said, exists because there are a tremendous amount of scholarly works that exist already. We just want to bring that together.
Yeah. And so as you're aggregating all of this data, what are some of the findings? Can you share with us some of the findings around these stereotypes that, perhaps you're seeing potential applications for, or even maybe some of these stereotypes that surprised you?
Well, I think every stereotype is surprising. Just the origin of this entire project was out of frustration and sort of where the national sort of discourse and rhetoric was going. And I kind of had a how did we get here question. And that just led me down this rabbit hole. And the more you start to dig into these various stereotypes, you realize that it's almost very, very deliberate, and it's almost to disenfranchise socioeconomic groups of the population who one particular group, wherever they are in the world, are feeling threatened by or want to keep in a very specific place. So we recently did some research around Judaism and understanding where the history of a lot of the Jewish stereotypes came from. And it was interesting to find out that, from early back as the Middle Ages, the Christian church, because of their laws around allowing Christians to participate in lending would not participate in any sort of money lending activities whatsoever. And that was left to Jewish people at the time to sort of fill that void. And as a result, there has been this association with Jewish people and money lending and greed and all of those types of things that, aren't, in many cases, are anti-Semitic. But when you talk to people today, and these are just things that they take as rote or anti-Semitic beliefs that they just think have existed, not realizing that the history of this goes as far back as the Middle Ages and has been perpetuated through literature like Shakespeare and Dickens, to continue to create this narrative. And then all of that is sort of tied in with Judas Iscariot and the narrative of Jesus as well. And so it's really, really fascinating when you start to peel back the layers of the onion and understand exactly where these things come from, that today we just, take as, oh, well, isn't that the case? Or isn't that a belief that has been bandied about for years? It must be true, but have no context of its history.
It's fascinating because I think of these stereotypes growing up, and I come from parents. My mom was German Christian, my dad was German Jewish during World War II, right? And continuing, but I can remember still on my block, one of the neighbors, we were sitting on the front stoop, and came by and took a handful of pennies and threw them in the air and said, "Let's watch the Jews run after them."
Wow.
And I remember that as a young kid. And I remember going, oh my God, 3 cents will buy me a bazooka. Like, I want a little candy. I want a little piece of gum with a comic inside. But I knew better than not to move an inch, and what that implied. And, I still recall, and, Liz, I think I shared this story with you when I was living in Thailand. I was in rural Thailand. I mean, I was the only one who looked like me for miles, right on the border with Myanmar, working there for 3 years. And I remember sitting with my coworkers. We were sitting on the floor sharing dinner, and I had brought chicken back from the market, and I was cutting up the pieces and sharing it with all of my coworkers. And they're like, "Don't cut the pieces so small. Don't be such a Jew." And I'm like, I'm in the middle of nowhere. There's not a Jew to be found. and no one knows that I am. Right. And so I said, "What do you mean by that?" And they go, I go, "My kauchai, like, I don't understand that word in Thai. What does that mean?" And they go, "A Jew is a stingy person." And I said, "But what is an actual Jew?" And they're just like, "Nothing. It just means a person who's stingy." And there was no connection to the religion. There was no connection to an understanding of an ethnic group, of religion, a place called Israel where a lot of these Jews live, or any place else in the world where this stereotype could be accessible. And yet it was so pervasive that my little village in northern Thailand was using this term, so like any good virus, infection spreads.
Yeah.
And so things stick. And it's not even necessarily, we say, well, there's always some truth to that, right? This money lending situation, as you mentioned, and that role being given to people, that eventually would, translate into economic systems and things like that, don't hold on to that stereotype necessarily, or maybe they do. And yet, right, it pervades in places where people don't even have a connection to the source. They don't have a connection to the people, culture, anything that created it.
Well, and that sort of was my fascination with all of this. It was like, how do we get from activities in the Middle Ages now being so pervasive that people don't even know that connection and they just take it as rote fact, right? And that was the power of mass media. I'm operating in the media space, and so I understand the power of having a megaphone that everybody's going to listen to. And so when you are telling a story, as a writer, you want to convey as much details about a character as quickly as possible to help you move your story along. If you had to spend your entire film, on character development, you might not get to the story. And so that's where, going back to using shortcuts, you see people pulling for a number of these tropes to let people know, oh yeah, that is this type of person, or that is this type of individual. And that's when it can get really, really dangerous, because you take one set of imagery from the Middle Ages, you hand that over to Shakespeare, who hands that over to Dickens, who hands that over to all the other sort of communicators and artisans over the years, and they're just
Hollywood.
copying and Hollywood, right? And they're just copying and pasting the image that they believe that people will immediately be able to latch onto and say, oh, yeah, that's a Jewish person. And sometimes that's in a split second. There was some outrage over a particular character in a Netflix film recently, who wasn't the nicest character in the show, but they flashed a Star of David on their neck for a couple of seconds, and all of a sudden, all of the associations were made, and they were negative connotations. And so I think this is where having tools like the Stereotype Project Foundation's database and all of the accompanying tools that we intend to build are really just designed to empower people in their process. If you have an intention, you want that to align with the impact. You don't want your impact to distract away from your intention. And, a lot of people may have nefarious intentions, but a lot of people end up just saying, hey, I didn't know. So we want to eliminate people's ability to say they didn't know, and hopefully provide resources that can get them much closer to the intention that they wanted to have.
And so what do you say to that? There's always, when you ask people to change their behavior, as anyone who listens to the show knows, right, which is the crux of innovation. When you're asking people to change their behavior, there's most often a backlash to it, right? We want to hold on to the things that we know, the things that were taught to us, the things that make us feel comfortable. What kind of response do you get for people who say, don't correct me, this is more of this woke stuff, these stereotypes exist because they are a helpful shorthand, and this is how humans communicate? Or I don't know, some of those things just are true. Why can't we hold on to those things? What about positive stereotypes? Why are those painful? Why do they hurt us? Liz, what do you think about the backlash that comes when you ask from people to change their behavior?
Did Gian freeze? Maybe.
Nope.
No, I thought
Okay.
you were going to.
Sorry.
No, I think there are a couple of answers to that. The pandemic really taught me a lot about human behavior, and how and why people dig their heels in. And one of the most powerful insights that I was able to read about was the fact that people often become their beliefs, or they believe that their belief and their perspective is so intertwined into who they are, that the possibility of changing their mind means that they are effectively changing who they are, but not in a positive way, right? And so you saw with people who had opinions about the vaccine one way or another, if that was challenged, they would really, really dig their heels in and say, you know what, I'm not even going to have this conversation. It's conspiracy theory one way or another. And so I think it's really helping people understand that you are not your beliefs. That is a facet of you, and you are open to changing your mind. That is how we grow. That is how we evolve. And so just because we're having a conversation about opinion that you may have, or perspective that you may have, and I may be challenging that opinion, that doesn't mean that I'm challenging you, right? And hopefully that sort of takes away some of the defensiveness. But the other part of it is that, why are these things so important? Why is it so important for you to use the word master bedroom versus the word primary bedroom? We've joked and said, if we just went to Zillow and said, can we do a find and replace of all of your master bedroom references to master bedroom and just change that to primary bedroom? How many people would actually notice? And then 5, 10 years from now, people are just going to start saying primary bedroom versus master bedroom. And it's not even something to be contentious about, but it goes back to the, well, oh, you're saying because I'm saying this, I'm prejudiced or I'm racist. And I'm like, no, we're not saying that about you. We're saying that about the language that's being used. And if that's not your intention, then it should be pretty easy to change the language. And then to your point about stereotypes being true, so a stereotype by definition is a gross generalization of a group of people, right? Or a group of things. And the reality of the situation is that the sample size that we use oftentimes when we're stereotyping is grossly misaligned with what may be a fact. If I wanted to say for a group of people in a particular area, in a particular neighborhood, that this is the truth, that may be accurate. But if I were to say that about all people who fit that description around the world, that's when you start to get into stereotyping, because again, your sample size has become so generalized that while it may be true for a small subset of those people, it's not actually representative of the whole. And then finally, about positive stereotypes, I would argue there's no such thing as a positive stereotype, right? And you look at Liz and you think about stereotypes about Asian people, and it's like, oh, Asians are good at math. That's a great positive stereotype. But what about Asian people who aren't actually good at math? Are you now disenfranchising them from the group of Asian people that they are ethnically a part of, right? And so even in an attempt to be positive or have a positive connotation with your stereotype, you are still having potentially harmful effects to some cross sections of people. And so for me, it goes back to intention. If your intention is not to offend people, if your intention is to accurately represent what it is that you're saying or you're implying, then stereotypes should not be part of your vernacular, because they can be harmful and they can be dangerous. If there are opportunities for you to be aware that you're stereotyping, take a breath, take a step back, and think about what are the downsides of what you are saying or doing or implying, then I think we're having the impact that we want to have in the long term.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and we're definitely hoping that, this isn't one-way street, right? So we're not just going to have individuals go through this process in their privacy of their homes. We're hoping to partner with a lot of media companies so that the content that's being pushed out, whether it's audio, visual, movies or films or podcasts, right, or books, or even song lyrics, that it's more balanced. And any kinds of kind of negative or even positive stereotypes could be better positioned and better explained, and people have the opportunity to not use those kind of copy or not use those texts. And we're hoping that in long term, if we're watching and listening and reading and kind of being more immersed into the world where people are represented more holistically and more kind of balanced way, then we would see each other differently than how we are currently seeing each other now.
You said song lyrics, and I keep thinking, wow, this is a group of people, right, who are going to have an issue with changing what is the creativity, right, among us. Like, do you find that stereotyping helps the conversation around freedom of speech, around creativity? Or do you find that you get pushback when people say, you know what, I have to express myself, I express myself, and this is how it works?
I mean, I think how we differentiate ourselves always is, one, we're not an advocacy group, right? We're just creating the database itself. And two, we're not thought police, right? So we may be able to flag these kinds of language and saying, hey, this is actually the intent of, like, that's where this phrase comes from, or like, you have tendency to speak in this way about this group of people, but it's still your choice to decide whether you want to say that or not. So we get it. There are people who their profession is to lean into the stereotype because that's their medium. So comedian, I think, is an example that we always give as a profession, people who are really leaning into those boundaries and really leaning into that awkward space of really accelerating or like even accentuating the stereotype even further. That's your choice, right? But what we're ultimately trying to do is take away the power to say, well, like, I didn't know that was inappropriate. Oh, I didn't know that I shouldn't say that about that group of people. So I think a perfect example, that happened recently was with Lizzo and Beyonce, and the song lyrics around spaz, and how
Mm.
they didn't know the intent and how that was used in a certain group of people. And they came out and publicly apologized to say, hey, that was not my intent of using this word in this way. And now I know, and now I know better. And moving forward, I'll make sure that doesn't happen. And I'm changing my lyrics because now I know better, right? So we're saying, hey, wouldn't it be great if we're able to help talents and creatives and everybody, all the individuals, mitigate some of these risks in advance, so that we are more intentional and more impactful in the way we communicate with each other. And even if we're communicating with the masses, we're hoping that this is a kind of tool and a resource that people could utilize to be better human beings every day.
Yeah, it's funny. So I do a little stand-up comedy, and I poke a lot of fun at my very unique upbringing of having a Holocaust refugee dad and a mom who was in Hitler Youth Corps as a kid.
Oh my God.
Right. So this is my background. I am the
Yes.
byproduct of that union, and it was so I open my set talking about the Holocaust because I keep it light.
Yes.
And and but there was a part of me as I was doing the jokes over and over again that I was like, I wonder how this would actually resonate in a German audience. And so I had a business trip to Berlin, and I sought out a comedy club, and I found an open mic night on a Sunday in Berlin,
So
and
brave.
which was my dad's hometown. And I was like, all right. And during the week, during my business trip, I had been landing jokes with my clients just to see because you can't tell a joke if someone feels sad, right? There's a lot of guilt and shame in Germany around the Holocaust. And so if people are sad, they're not laughing. Well, it's my job to make them laugh, right? So I was testing these jokes, and it was amazing to see generationally. Younger people thought they were funny. Older people, I could see them recoil a little bit as soon as I said, oh, my dad was a Holocaust survivor. And they would go, oh, and they would remember all of that schooling that they got, right, about what their parents or grandparents had been responsible for during the war or participated in. And then, but a younger generation felt no real connection to it, no emotional charge from it. And so I did my stand up, and people laughed, and I was like, oh, okay. So finding a way to not just manage the stereotypes, but to deliver them in a way that actually puts people at ease was part of the task. And settling into something that doesn't necessarily, make the listener hold on to the stereotype as something that's permanent. But something that was fleeting at a time, and we can even reference that stereotype and know that we've moved on. And that was a big learning for me, because I hold both of those stereotypes within me. And it's also very easy to play off them, having them both in me. So, but the greatest revelation I had about these stereotypes, I was volunteering in a homeless shelter, and one of the men came in, and he was from Rwanda, and I was teaching him how to use a computer in the homeless shelter. And we got to talking, and I said, so are you Hutu or Tutsi? And he said, I'm both. My mother was Hutu and my father was Tutsi. And I said, wow. I said, I have an interesting background because because of where I come from. And we sat and talked for 4 hours about how similar it was, our backgrounds of Hutu and Tutsi, of when you have these very compelling competing forces operating within you, and knowing those stereotypes are really playing out in your body, not just to mention in your day to day. So, and you're carrying them with you all the time. So it was an eye-opening experience to suddenly go, oh, this is a universal experience of two colliding sides, and, at another time, Protestant and Catholic, that combination, right, would have been in some places, that's a terrifying thing, or that seems overwhelming, or that's a clash of stereotypes. But it's amazing when we decide, if we can embrace them. I don't mean the stereotypes, but we just embrace what they are so we can see them for what they are. Yeah, I'm also very curious, as a student watching propaganda, watching movements and things like that. It's very easy to watch stereotypes getting swept up in political rhetoric, in propaganda, et cetera. How much of the work that you're doing plays into kind of, again, not being watchdog or the police element about it, but the opportunity to document these stereotypes that get used in ways that can be harmful.
Yeah, ironically, that's how it started, right? It was leading up to the 2016 election, and I was consulting in Philadelphia and watching, and Philadelphia in Pennsylvania is already a very interesting demographic and population. And I'm watching Trump's ascension, and politics aside, I was just, really disappointed at how the country was fracturing. Like, we weren't having a conversation, a dialogue anymore. It was almost you were talking past each other. And so that was, the primary reason why, I started evaluating and investigating this stereotypes on the whole, because it was like, how did we get here? And I think the political rhetoric, it comes in waves, right? During an election cycle, there's all eyes on what is being said and what is being done in a democracy generally. And then outside of that, I think the general mass media sort of have the megaphone and have a lot of power in sort of disseminating that information. But it's also a part of political strategy, as you said, right? Like the efficacy of propaganda really has allowed people to be successful and win races and lead countries. And so I think it really comes back to that individual accountability and making tools and information and resources available to everyone. Because I think propaganda works because of lack of information or insight about what's going on, right? Its subtlety and its efficacy is a function of the audience not actually being aware that it's taking place, or the history or the context of what is being sort of articulated. And I think the more we get these tools, the more we get the information into individual people's hands, the more individual people can say, hey, wait a minute, that's not true. That's not accurate. That's not a full representation of whoever group it is that you're talking about. And I think the more voices that are empowered, the more balance there is to the platform and the magnitude of that platform and that megaphone versus the individual, the vox populi, who may have issues with that propaganda being used. And so, similarly, as we were talking about with the song lyrics, that Lizzo situation, the Beyonce situation, hopefully there's a world where our tools are available, that doesn't happen in a public setting. It happens in the writer's room, where somebody goes over the lyrics, runs the script, and says, hey guys, this might get us into some trouble. Is this what you mean to say? And there's this, oh no, that's not at all what we intended to say. I would love if that would happen in speech writers' rooms, but oftentimes people are acutely aware of what it is that they're doing. And they're wielding these dog whistles and this propaganda to get what they want and achieve the goals that they set out for themselves. And so the only way I see that being effective is if there is that public outcry, that public resistance to what is going on. And the only way we can get the public there is if they're informed. And that's where we come in.
Right. So how do you fundraise around the storytelling, the Stereotype Project Foundation? How do you attract donors, and what kind of donors? I should ask the question, what kind of companies are really working with you? And then what kind of donors are you looking to attract to keep this database growing?
Yeah, so we do have two kind of anchor donors who are in place at this point, who wrote us, pretty decent amount of funding for us. So one is Bill and Sarah Morgan of Kinder Morgan down in Texas, and Blackstone Charitable Foundation also wrote us a check. We're kind of in discussions with kind of a lot of different Fortune 500 companies, so including media companies and financial institutions and technology companies, or brand or product, customer product kind of, consumer kind of product services kind of companies as well. So we are talking to everybody and anybody, because this applies to everybody and anybody. And I think whenever we talk to any group of people, it's always interesting to see how they layer in what we're trying to do into their own space and apply our resources and what we're trying to create and tools to say, oh, actually, it would be amazing if we're able to take what you guys are doing there and apply it in this way in our kind of medium, in our kind of sector, our industry, in our workflow. So the product and what we're creating as I think service has kind of evolved quite a bit since the initial stages of when Gian and I had a random conversation about this project back in 2020. And that's because we're learning, because we're having more discussions of people who are way smarter than we are and telling us, hey, you guys could actually take that and apply it in this way. We're like, oh my gosh, so we didn't think about that. That's another kind of revenue, another kind of channel for us to impact our culture and society. So it's constantly growing, but we take donations from everybody. We are actively trying to look for partners for Giving Tuesday. That's going to happen on 29th of November. So individual donors and any kind of corporations that have matching programs, we would love to partner either as a town hall kind of setting where we could talk about our project, or being included in a newsletter that could be distributed to their employees as well.
Right. I forgot, right? Giving Tuesday, that's coming up. That's a huge deal for large companies. And this is the Innovation Storytellers Show. So I hope we're also passing on some knowledge of the stories that we're telling inside the walls of our companies and what we're saying to our customers, and getting clear that stereotypes aren't necessarily the shortcut we hope them to be. In fact, they probably wind up cutting out a lot more people than they wind up including. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that summary. We may have to borrow that.
Feliz Navidad. There you go. Well, this has just been such a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much for giving us this eye on stereotyping. And I hope for our innovators who are listening, it's time to really question our biases. It's time to question the stereotypes that we're operating within, whether it's about our colleagues and coworkers, or whether it's the markets that we're trying to serve. Until we get a little bit more granular and leave some of these stereotypes behind, we may never get to the clarity of really reaching the heart of our coworkers and our clients in the way that we want to. So thank you so much for all the hard work and the heavy lifting that you're doing. If people want to contribute individually to the Stereotype Project Foundation, how should they do that?
So they could find us at the stereotypeproject.org, and there's a donate button there, so they could definitely do that as well. And if there's any collaboration and partnerships that people are interested in learning more about, they could reach out to me directly. And my email address is liz.kim@thestereotypeproject.org.
Fantastic. Gian, Liz, thank you so much for joining me today. I can't wait for the world to hear about the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for
Thank you
having
so
us.
much for having us. Thank you.